Hey, hi, and welcome to episode 18 of the Clive Barker podcast. We're going to be talking about movies that never were, and for today, we'll be talking about an unused script for Dread. I'm Ryan Danhauser, and with me today is Jose Leitao.
Hey there.
To start out with, in Occupy Midian news, I think there have been a couple of new screenings announced, right?
Yeah, there's been some new screenings announced, and there's a new one in Sheffield, I think.
Yeah, and that was in October.
Yeah, and let me check what else is new. So there'll be a screening in Sheffield, UK on Friday the 26th of October for Celluloid Screams. That's the event. And what else is new here?
And in other Occupy Midian news, there was an article written for Empire Magazine in their September issue.
Number 279.
Yeah, and I've looked. I mean, I downloaded a copy of it, but I haven't read it yet, and I plan on getting a copy of the magazine as well.
Oh yeah. Well, I read the magazine. I read the article. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's a full 7-page article in the middle of Empire UK magazine. It talks about what happened to Nightbreed. Owen Williams, the guy who wrote the article, interviewed Clive Barker, and he was asking him about the production process and his experience when they started changing the movie. And Joe Roth, the producer, stepped down from Morgan Creek, and then James Robinson came on board, and he was talking about how James Robinson did not get the movie making the monsters be the good guys. So that was one of the things where it started to go downhill. And then they, of course, forced some reshoots, and he started to see his whole project, go a little bit not the way he wanted it to be. And then, of course, we also know a few more things about why some characters were dubbed by other people. Clive Barker mentioned that at one point when they brought the movie back to America, apparently they didn't want to pay for any, plane tickets for the actual UK actors to come in and redub their voices in some scenes. So they just got regular people, other actors that were cheaper to get because, they were closer. And they did that. At least that's what I got from the article. He said that they didn't want to pay for, plane tickets for Doug Bradley and all those people that got redubbed. So they just went ahead and did that in post-production.
And we just learned from the Occupy Midian Facebook group that Nicholas Vince was dubbed also.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, you can tell when he says, "Move and I'll slit your throat," and...
Yeah, and then... but it's weird because that's a different voice than his normal speaking voice in the movie. And that is also not Nicholas Vince's voice. Right,
and there seems to be some kind of effect on it, just like Peliquin's voice at some point. Not at the Blood of Baphomet scene, though. He's Boone's advocate, and that we hear his voice, which I'm assuming is still not Nicholas Vince's voice, but in that scene, his voice doesn't have that weird effect, that reverb effect that... put in when he says "move and I'll slit your throats," but that's just the way
And also when he says "what" when he and Peliquin are at the gate and Peliquin says something natural.
Yeah, that
doesn't have an effect on it either.
Yeah. Well, he also replied something on the wall of Occupy Midian, didn't he? I mean, someone asked him, "So what's the deal with Kinski? Why is he a Nightbreed, and what's his powers? Does he have any special powers?"
Yeah,
and
it's kind of funny that they're not really superheroes.
No, and I think he just mentioned that he's probably just handy with knives, and it has his own deformity that was caused apparently from the Nightbreed Chronicles. It says that he took some Saint Vito's dissolution, and he wanted to change his face because the girlfriend he had thought he was ugly, and he got into a fugue state, messed up his face, and fell into the Seine River in Paris. So that's how he made his way there. Probably, I always saw that the Nightbreed not as people who necessarily have powers, but just the tribes of outcasts from society. So
yeah.
Some of them can be monstrous, others can just be outcasts, have special talents or something.
In other Clive Barker news, they've revealed the cover for Richard Kirk's 25th anniversary edition of Weave World, and it's pretty nice looking.
Oh yeah,
and we'll put a link to it in the show notes from the Revelations website.
I like that logo with the 2 W's from Weave World.
Oh yeah,
it's really beautiful. Yeah, it's very simplistic and very elegant, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with these some of these special editions. We hear about them so far in advance, but it's just months and months before they're actually ready to go. Yeah.
That's just the way things are. It takes time to make all this art and, compose the book graphically and all of that.
Yeah.
So, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward. It's going to be a beautiful book.
And, so on to our main topic. There was a script written by Drew McWeeny and Scott Swan in 2003 for the movie Dread.
Yeah. Drew McWeeny is also known as Moriarty from Ain't It Cool News. So just this might help. This might help some people recognize who we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was 2003 script for Dread. It's not to be confused with the later one that actually became a movie. This is a totally different script, and it would have been a completely different version of Dread.
Yes.
So as we kind of go along here, just comparing it to the story, there's some things that jump out right away. The characters, they've tied them together in a way that's a lot different from the story. And I mean, like Stephen Grace and Cheryl start out the movie in like high school, and they're in a relationship, and she dumps him so that she could have this college experience, and see other people and all of that. Even though they're going to go to the same college anyway, so it's kind of puts them in this awkward position.
Yeah, the script opens with what you were saying, and. The funny thing about that scene is that Cheryl has just gotten the letter that she's going to go into the college she wanted, and she's thinking, well, I'm going to have to break up with, my boyfriend. And then he shows up also holding a letter with a big happy face, like, hey, I just got into the same college you did. We're going to have a great time together. And she's like, Stephen, we have to talk.
Yeah.
And the next scene, it's like the guy is almost in tears, but why do you want to break up with me?
Yeah.
So that's a funny opening there. And
he can't get over it when he's in college. All he does is sort of follow her around and think about her. And
yeah. But let me just introduce a little more about the whole story behind this. It's like, okay, so Drew McWeeny and Scott Swan, they were the duo who was ready to adapt Clive Barker's Dread. This was reported back in as early as 2003. I don't know how early the project was, started, but they signed to adapt the story in 2003, I think, and. So this was supposed to. They were looking for a director at Fox, and they even talked to. There were articles on Fangoria about their adaptation of Clive Barker's Dread, which they scripted for 20th Century Fox, and at that point, 20th Century Fox owned the Dread. They had optioned the short story, so. They were writing it. They were trying to get a director. They were trying to get Eduardo Rodriguez, who had made an occult thriller called Curandero, which apparently was released by Dimension.
Is that a U.S. movie?
I don't know. I didn't really look into this movie. I was just looking at the names of the people who were involved with this. And then, of course, after Eduardo Rodriguez was tapped to direct Dredd, they started announcing this, and Drew McWeeny and Scott Swan also wrote the episode for John Carpenter's Masters of Horror episode, Cigarette Burns, which is surprising because I think that's a really good episode. But this script is, I had mixed feelings about this script because at one point I used to hate it, and then after I saw the actual Dredd movie that came out from that team, was it DiBlasi? Yeah, Anthony DiBlasi, with the guy from Twilight, and I was like, oh my God, this is even worse. So now in retrospect, after I reread the script for the episode of the podcast, I actually found myself enjoying it a little more. So I think I'm going to backtrack a little bit and say, even though it's still, as a Clive Barker purist, it's still a little despicable what they do to the story.
Yeah.
But I see it more as more entertaining this time around. I had more fun looking at it. I thought, well, you know what? If I just relax a little bit and don't care too much about, sticking to the story, they do use some of the elements, and they actually made a story by itself that's actually entertaining. But, they could have slapped on another title instead of Dredd, and would have been a fun movie to watch. So, I guess I'm a little more ambivalent about the script. There are good things in here, and so and then of course Eduardo Rodriguez was meant to direct this, and Scott Swan and Moriarty, Drew McWeeny was going to do this, but then what happened was Seraphin Films regained control of the property. So, and that's when they decided to do another project, start over from the beginning. That's when they made the DiBlasi movie.
Okay.
But, there was actually a quote from a Shock Till You Drop article when they visited the set for Clive Barker's Dredd that was being done. And they said, I think Fox just realized there was no way you could do this film at a studio and do it for what needed to be done. Dredd producer Joe Daly, Midnight Meat Train, explains, it was just going to be too harsh and too hardcore. It was just frustrating experience for everyone because no one could get what they wanted in a weird way. Clive's material is hard to do at studios. And, of course, this script that we're going to discuss, it involves bigger sets. It would involve like a big haunted house set, for example, and that would have cost money. So,
and there are lots of quick cuts between scenes and different locations, and as you go along, you find out that Quaid is a professor, and they're all taking a class. All these characters are taking a class on fear. So Cheryl and Steven are two of the students, but we also follow a good 5 more students in this class as well.
Yeah, and I thought that they made a reasonable, job fleshing out these characters and, their friends and all that stuff. Yeah. That's one of the things about the script that I enjoyed, is that I think they're not just all cardboard cutout characters. You can actually start to see the differences between them. Like Cheryl lives in a house with 2 other girls, and they have their own dramas going on. One of them is meant to be very virginal, the other is a little more slutty, and her parents are visiting, and there's a prank that's pulled, and also there's a guy who's Steven's roommate. He loves his computer. He has all these little nerdy quirks that, further ahead, he'll also be pranked because at one point, like you said, one of the big differences in this script is that Quaid is a professor. He's not just a guy who hangs around the campus. In this script, he's actually a professor, and he's doing this class. What was the class about? Class is called Fear in Modern Culture. And it's funny because after Steven follows Cheryl into the same college, and he still hasn't gotten over her. He thought she was the one, and, he meets Quaid in a bar, and the exchange they have is similar to the one in the story in the Books of Blood. And he realizes that there's something going on between Steven and Cheryl. And, Quaid starts to, understand what's going on. And Cheryl the next day enrolls into, Quaid's class, and she tells him about it. And
Steven's like, I bet I could get into that class, too.
Yeah, and she's like, why would you want to do that? You're a freshman and you need a letter of exemption signed by Quaid. And he's like, well, I can get that, because he just had a drink with a professor the day before. So he's like, I'm cool with him. So he just goes over, and Quaid is playing basketball with some other students in the campus. And they have this really rough basketball game. And at the end of it, basically Steven gets hit in the face by one of the guys that's going to be in his class, and Quaid this guy, there's a bully in the story that was Cheryl's boyfriend in college, and when Quaid and Steven are having a drink at a bar, Steven's pissed off because Cheryl is with her new boyfriend at the bar.
Yeah.
Quaid says, oh, she was your ex-girlfriend? He's like, yeah, well, she broke up with me before we came to the college. And he's like, oh, let me do something here. And he just walks over to the guy, to Cheryl's new boyfriend, and he says something to him that we never realize what it is. And the guy goes white, and he starts trying to attack Quaid, but then he holds himself back, and he just leaves the bar. And it's he said something really shocking to him. Yeah. And then the next morning when they're playing basketball, that guy is in the opposing team, and Quaid just walks over after Steven joins the game, and he whispers something to the guy, and then he goes back and they start playing, and this guy just hits Steven right in the face while they're playing basketball.
Yeah.
And he goes what the hell did you say to that guy, Quaid? And he's like, oh, I just told him you were the reason why I embarrassed him at the club last night. And he's like, what? Why?
Yeah.
So Quaid likes to manipulate people. He likes to play them around against each other. So right off the bat, And, of course, then Steven hits the guy back. He scores a hoop. They win the game. Yeah. And he's like, okay, show up for class tomorrow. You're in my Fear in Modern Culture class.
Yeah.
And, Cheryl, of course, is, a little, miffed that he's her ex-boyfriend is going to be in the class. So there's always this competition between them. It's like, well, I bet I can be the professor's pet more than you. So, and then Cheryl actually starts to try to approach Quaid more. And on the other hand, Steven is also approaching Quaid in his own way, more like a bro thing. So, and then, of course, there's these exercises Quaid gives the students, and he's like, well, I want you to scare someone.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want you to...
That's their homework.
Yeah, one of the homework is I want you to find a person, find out what makes them tick, what they're afraid of, and use that. And there's, like you said, all those other characters in the class, and they all have friends or roommates or something that's mentioned in the script. And there's a series of, this is like the second act of the movie. The movie goes from character to character as they select their targets and prepare their pranks. And, of course, some of them go well, some of them go terribly wrong. Eventually, one person kills herself over a prank.
Right, because they faked a pregnancy test somehow.
Yeah, it's one of Cheryl's housemates. And her parents were visiting for Christmas or something, and whenever the virgin one, she puts some Ipecac on her breakfast, and she starts puking, and then she fakes a pregnancy test and makes her believe that she's pregnant, because they were all going back and forth about how one of them was such a virgin, the other was such a slut, and, it starts getting ugly. So there's one scene where they introduce the house, apart from the beginning. The beginning, the movie opens with a house.
Yeah, and this is one of the ways the movie gets really weird, and really strays from the story.
Yeah, because now we're going into what Quaid is afraid. Because in the story, Quaid was deadly afraid of people with axes and pictures of people being killed with axes.
And clowns.
And the clowns.
Yeah.
And in this one, he tells people about a party he's going to throw. He tells his students, well, I'm going to throw a party. You guys want to show up? And they're like, yeah, sure. So they show up, and it's like, oh, dude, this can't be the place. It's like a horribly crumbling house. And they go in. There's Quaid. Hey, guys, don't touch the jukebox because, I think the electrical wiring in this house is a little, flimsy. So, and it's a really creepy house. And I think Steven starts to research more about the house. And that's when he finds out, wait, no, he's researching about Quaid.
Yeah.
Because he gets really upset with Quaid because one time he's regretting, he's kind of resentful of Quaid's proximity to Cheryl. And of course, Cheryl and Quaid do get together and they do have sex.
Mm-hmm.
But so I think Steven one day he goes into the house and he finds a false door on a wall, and he discovers that he can go into the walls, like there's a space between the walls, like in old houses. And he discovers there's a secret compartment, and he finds like these kind of a little bed or a nest with like
and a bunch of notebooks and stuff.
Old toys and drawings and like a little wind-up disc gramophone or something. So what he finds out when he starts looking for Quaid in yearbooks and stuff is that he published a story about a house. And he published a story about a house and a monster in a house. And he discovers that he's talking about that house that he just bought. And that the monster was this deformed kid who used to live there. Because there used to be a couple that lived in that house, and they had like 2 kids. And I think they were called the Bells. No, what was...
Yeah, it was the Bells.
Yeah, apparently they had met with a horrible death, and nobody knew, but they had another kid who they kept from everybody, and that kid was the kid that used to play inside the walls and generally just kept inside the house at all times.
And he lived there for a long time after the death, and nobody knew about him.
Yeah, which is kind of weird because you start thinking, what did he eat? Mice? So, and then, of course, it turns out that Quaid was the guy who discovered that person. He when he was a kid, he walked into that house like on a dare from other kids, and he went in there and he heard this music and he started listening to the music that guy was playing inside the house, and he went up the stairs and he went into a room and there was this creature sitting down with his back turned to the wall, to the door, and all of a sudden he just got up. This really kind of yellowish giant of a guy. He turned around with his, ugly-looking face and long fingernails, and he, saw the kid, and he wanted to play with the kid, but, he just grabbed him, pulled him back into the room, and he just threw him into the space in the crawl hole, and we don't really know what happened, but Quaid has a limp, so we're guessing that probably he got beat up or abused or something by that mentally disabled person. So his fear was that house and what happened there. And Steven uses that to his advantage at one point because he goes in the house and he starts playing those records when Quaid is there.
Yeah.
And
it's weird because they try to, aside from this thing, they try to show Quaid as being completely fearless, right? I mean, about other situations. Like they go to like a quick stop kind of a little store, and it's being robbed. And
oh yeah.
And they're pointing guns everywhere, and Steven is afraid because Steven's there too, and he's afraid, and he's like, hey, I'm not going to do anything, and they point the gun at Quaid, and he's just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah. And there's also that part where Quaid turns against Steven, because there's one point where Quaid does his experiment with Cheryl, and he actually sticks her in kind of a tower, like in the attic of the house.
Yeah.
And he's doing that whole experiment with the meat thing because Cheryl is a vegetarian and she doesn't like meat, and he wants to find out why. And then one time, Steven is in the house, and he also entraps Steven. But this is really weird. While in the story, in the Books of Blood, he would get Stephen Grace inside like a basement, like hanging from a platform with earbuds in his ear, like really tightly strapped to his face. In this one, it's really, really strange, because in this one, he puts some kind of mask contraption on his head, pours hot wax into it, and then drops him on the roof of the house for some godforsaken reason. Yeah. Well, in this one, it's like after he defeats him, he like cracks him on the head with a gun. After that scene you were talking, and then he just straps on this weird mask on his head, and he pours hot molten wax into the mask to seal it off.
Wow!
It's a mask that like covers down until his nose, most of his eyes, and then across his face, over his ears. And then he just puts him on the roof tiles of the house, like, and it's raining and stuff, and it's like Steven wakes up in the ceiling and he starts sliding down the tiles, and the rain is coming down, and he starts to rip the mask off his face, and he does. So in that case, he doesn't really.
So he's able to take it off. Then what's the point?
Yeah, he's able to take it off, and the rain starts washing some of the wax off too. So he never really goes to that breaking point that we see in the story in the Books of Blood. And then he goes on to try to save Cheryl from that tower on the top of the building, on the top of the house. But, Cheryl is in her own world, and she's like, grunting and stuff inside the room because she hasn't really broken yet. And the meat is on the floor, and it's a very rushed moment because Quaid is watching what they're doing, and he's seeing that he's going to try to release Cheryl, so he's trying to go, oh, no, you don't. And basically, Steven gets back into the house through a window and manages to run off and hide in the middle of the walls after he uses that secret passage.
Right.
And Quaid doesn't know where he is. And so Steven takes that opportunity to go to that secret spot where there was the gramophone thing. He starts playing those records that's singing, which I think was like a...
It's like a trigger that makes him Quaid afraid. And then this is sort of germane, I guess, because there's a little tie-in to the short story, because then when the police came later on, he didn't have any bullets, so he grabbed an axe.
Because the police had been called, and after the other girl killed herself, after she thought she was pregnant, and her parents, the police was called because the girls who did this told the police that this was a homework done by their professor Quaid. And so the police is arriving at the house, and Quaid is there going berserk.
He killed one of the policemen with the axe, and that's when they started shooting him, and he fell into that bottomless pit. It's sort of interesting. I mean, it's like, well, when you read that, it's kind of like, well, an axe was really important in the story, so we got to throw one in there somewhere.
Yeah, I guess you're right. So they pretty much kill him right there.
Wow.
And finally, and Steven comes out of the house, and Cheryl is rescued after she broke and ate all the meat, but then she's pretty much normal after this finale. And then we cut back to the same class in the classroom, and the students are there saying, well, I thought we should have like one final meeting just to to tell everybody what happened and to disband this class. And then Steven just picks up the story that Quaid wrote when he was younger in the college newspaper or something. Starts a story about the house and what happened to Quaid, and that's it. That's the movie. And I thought, it's not a bad movie if they didn't call it Dread.
Yeah, but I mean, it had all the same characters.
Yeah, Dread, it would have been
plus some
weird.
extra ones.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I thought it was interesting, an adaptation.
Yeah.
A very loose adaptation.
Yeah. Well, and that whole thing about the freak living in the that was living in the walls of the house, and that was what he was afraid of. It's like, where'd you get that? I mean, that's not even close to what the story was about.
No, yeah. I mean, the story is very changed. But the way I see it, de Blasi also changed a lot of the story when he did his adaptation.
Well, and I think not as much as this one.
Well, I disagree. I mean, if you think about it, and I'm going to use some spoilers, I mean, seriously, Cheryl is left in the room with Steven's body to eat.
Yeah. I mean, but that ending compared to this one with the police shootout. I mean, that's and that sensory deprivation scene is a big part of the story, and it just got glossed over.
But so it's also glossed over in the de Blasi movie.
Well, they give it to a different. They do it on a different guy.
Yeah, with a belt and a couple of Dixie cups. I mean,
yeah, and then he just shoots near his ears and deafens him. So it's kind of like in both of these scripts, nobody can bear to mess up the main character, because it's like, we've spent 90 minutes with this guy. Do we really want to break him and make him go crazy? And I guess not. I don't know. Maybe they think the studios can't handle that, or the producers.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that pretty much everybody came out a loser in these two adaptations, especially if you're a Clive Barker fan.
Yeah.
But like I said, I didn't. I guess this script that we're discussing changed things so much that it didn't make me angry when they started creating new stuff, because it was very loosely based. While in the de Blasi one, maybe I was hoping it to be a little better because some things were closer to the story. But then they just, when they create new stuff, it just didn't make any sense at all to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's hard to explain why the actual movie that we got makes me a little more angry than this one.
Well, and yeah, I mean, and you're right also, because this one is only a script, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things that could have happened by the time the movie was done. It could have been, it could have been better. It could have been, a lot better. It could have been worse. And one weird thing, because I've read a lot of scripts, and I've never seen scripts where they write the soundtrack songs into the script before. Have you? Because at one point it's like, at this point we're hearing "Smells Like Teen Spirit" by such and such band that's covering it or whatever. Yeah,
I guess. Well, it makes sense if they're trying to date something, or if they're trying to create a mood or something. I mean, for example, for Watchmen, there are some musics which in the soundtrack which were put there because of actual connections to the story, like Bob Dylan's "Times They Are Changing" and "Hallelujah" from Leonard Cohen. Those I think are in the script. So, but I agree, it's not very common. But if it fits within the scene, if it has like a reason for it, then I think it's fine.
Well, and in this case, it wasn't exactly like a reason. It's just more like, this is kind of sort of fits the mood, I think. So, and this is, it must, and it's probably more like, this is some band that I know, because that the writers know. So, they put that in.
Yeah. Could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like I said, and then, of course, the funny thing is, these guys were not the last ones to try to adapt the Dredd story for Fox. There was actually another pair of people who were going to adapt it. After Drew McWeeny and Scott Swan, Adam Girash and Jace Anderson, who wrote Night of the Demons, also took a crack at the script before Seraphin regained full control of the property.
So there's another one that we just haven't read?
There might be another draft, yeah. There might be another adaptation. So I don't know if that ever made it past the treatment or if there was actually a script. How I got this script was a weird story. I got this script by email from someone, which was using anonymous emails. I think this was at the stage where they decided not to go with this. Like between the time when they told Drew McWeeny and Scott Swan that okay, we're going to try someone else. I think they got really upset about it, and someone actually started popping up in Clive Barker forums that I used to be at the time, and they were like, well, you guys should know what's going on with Dredd. It's going to be horrible. They're just discarding this great team that had a fine script, and I can send you guys a script now because it's not going to get done. And I'm like, hey, can I have a copy of the script? And I was like, yeah, well, just send me your email. I'll send you a copy. And I sent an email, and I got a copy of it on my email from some anonymous emailer, and I was like, wow, this is creepy. And I don't know who it was, but I'm willing to guess it might have been one of the people in this team that was adapting the story. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. I mean, who else would be? How many other people would be involved really when it's just a script?
Moriarty from Ain't It Cool News. That's the alias for Drew McWeeny.
Yeah.
And he has a history of reviewing scripts for Ain't It Cool News, which is funny because when reviews started popping up about this Dredd script, he got postal. He was like, well, you guys don't know what's good. And, he started, tearing people a new one, and he actually was threatening with lawsuits and stuff.
Yeah.
You can't badmouth this script. So it's funny because he had a history of reviewing scripts and going like, oh, this is bad because this and that. Then all of a sudden, when it's his script, he gets all personal.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that the one most affected by this is just some girl that gets tricked, into thinking she's pregnant by other kids from the class. Like Cheryl is in on that one.
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's like who's the real bad guy? I mean, Quaid sort of talked them into doing this, but they're the ones that knew her, and they probably should have known what kind of effect it would have. Well,
the way they set it up was like, if you're a good guy, then the prank you pull on the person you were targeting would be a harmless prank. Like Steven targets his roommate, and like I said, the guy worshipped his own computer, and it was like, oh, he kept it pristine and cleaned it up. Went through this whole ritual of defragging it, and all that stuff. And then one day, Steven messes up with his computer, and he gets up the next morning, turns on his computer, and starts making this horrible screeching noise, and, he goes like, oh, what's wrong with my computer?
And then the screen says, format complete or something like that.
Yeah. and his roommate walks into the bedroom and says, Steven, did you do something to my computer? And he says, I might have. And he starts attacking him, and it's like, what did you do to my computer? You destroyed my computer. And it's like, dude, quiet down and take a look. It's not your computer. It's another one. I just replaced it. Your computer's fine. And the guy looks, and it's like, oh, there was another computer underneath the desk, which was the real one.
Yeah.
So that was in the midst of his own fear coming true. What did you see in his eyes? And Steven says, surrender. And it's like, there's that little element of, research that Quaid wants to know what Dredd makes on people, what the effect it makes after someone is confronted with the worst fears. Yeah. How do they deal with it? What happens in their mind?
Yeah, and the core of this, is kind of the same in all three of these, the original story and then these two movie adaptations. The core is kind of the same in that Quaid is using other people to try to help solve his personal problem. of his own dread.
Yeah. And basically, I think that was it. He tries to do that because he locks Cheryl in the crow's nest or whatever it was called, the little part on the top of the house. Mm-hmm.
And those are like observatories, right? I mean, she should be able to see out. She should.
I think so. I think the windows in the crow's nest were supposed to be boarded because when Stephen is walking on the tiles in the rooftop of the house, he's sneaking through some boards to look at Cheryl inside the crow's nest. So they were boarded out. But I agree, it's not so much of a spot where you could make some sensory deprivation like in the story where Cheryl doesn't even know if it's daytime or nighttime, and there's a light bulb that's on.
And how hard would it have been to just put that in the basement? But I mean, that crow's nest is sort of, a recurring thing in the story, so I guess he wanted to use it for that, but it doesn't make as much sense. I mean, and then this thing about putting him on the roof, that's even worse.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess they didn't want to put the characters in a situation that they couldn't get them out of. Mm-hmm. But, I don't know. I mean, it takes on its own life at that point. It's a different story. But
in reply to your question, so why do people go along with it if it's going to kill a girl? I think that it was because Cheryl's roommate, I think Cheryl was aware that there was a prank being pulled, but I don't think that she knew the extent of it or, what would really... She thought it might be something like, well, pull a prank and then tell her, oh, well, you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
And actually, the other girl who was actually angry at the girl she's pranking never really bothered to dispel, that there was a prank. So she
just left.
She just left.
Yeah, she's like, oh, you're pregnant. Well, don't worry. We'll all help you out. We'll be around to help you out. And then she leaves.
Yeah. And then the girl is left alone by herself, and her parents are coming for Christmas, and she thinks she's pregnant, and what's going to happen? And then when they go back to the house, they open the door, and it's like, oh, something smells in here. Yeah. And she hung herself on her closet or something.
Yeah. And another prank that they did on another girl who was afraid to walk at night by herself. They sort of led her around some back alleys, and then these guys wearing black and white masks scared her.
Kind of reminded me of Scream or something, the movie.
Yeah.
And that scene might have been fun if, it actually had been shot in the movie. I mean, it was like this girl is very, scared, and she likes to be in places full of people at all times. And one of the girls from Quaid's class approaches her and says, hey, do you want to do some study group sometime? And they go over to the study group board, and it's like there's only night spots available for study rooms. And she goes, oh, well, let's just pick one. It'll be quiet or something. Yeah. And then they're walking around by night, and this is actually a pretty elaborate prank because it seems like most of the friends agreed to do this, and they start following them, popping up from corners, and
the girl that she normally liked to walk with had disappeared or something.
Yeah,
so she couldn't.
She takes a turn further ahead, and she just disappears, and the girl is left alone, and she starts freaking out because she feels like she's being followed, and she starts seeing these people walking in front of her and stuff.
They didn't really. I don't think the script really explained how they resolved that or said, "Hey, I guess campus security came along and said, "Okay, you're fine."
Security. Yeah, she just freaked out. She fell down, hurt herself or something, and then the campus security popped up, and they all came up and said, "Oh, it's okay. We're just pulling a prank on you." And then security came up, and they were like, "Cheese it." They just went away.
Yeah.
So that was that prank, and hey, is that a little Joey in the podcast?
What's that?
Is that a little Joey in the podcast?
Oh, yeah, that's Joey.
Sorry.
Okay. Fine.
We can go.
It's his birthday, right?
Actually next week.
Who knows? Maybe, like you said, if they had gone through and shot the movie, maybe they would have gone through another draft or something. Maybe it would have been interesting, but it would be very different from.
I wonder what Clive would think seeing this movie before it's edited, or during the editing. Or
Yeah, well, you know how it is when they're in a process of writing a script for one of Clive's stories. He always says that, I have full confidence in this team. They're going to do a great job. I've read the script. It's pretty good. In fact, he actually said that in a few interviews when Drew McKinney and Scott Swan were working on this. So, yeah. I think that if I go to Revelations and we go to the Dread old project section, Books of Blood, Dread. Okay. All right. Actually, well, now I'm reading Revelations. Actually, the announcement that Fox were considering a feature version of Dread was actually in 2002.
Oh, okay.
It was together with Seraphin, but of course, Seraphin, I guess, didn't have full control of the property. They had to work with Fox, and then apparently Seraphin got the property back. So, and what Phil and Sarah said here was, here it is. After September 2004, there was a flurry of message board activity and acidity after a draft script began to circulate. And in the summer of 2005, it was suggested that writing honors may have moved on yet again. Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So I guess I got this script in 2004. That makes sense. That's pretty much how I remember.
Yeah.
So, and then it says here something like, like I was trying to see if Clive Barker said something. Here it is. By Phil and Sarah Stokes. Says here, Dread is moving well, I think. I have high hopes for it. It's a really superb script, and it's a story which I always thought lend itself to cinematic adaptation. It doesn't have a supernatural element to it, of course, which for certain kinds of people in the studios, it's a reassuring element. So he's talking about this. And Clive Barker also said at one point, Fox also has a horror movie of mine called Dread from Books of Blood that the writers have adapted really beautifully, so I believe that's a high priority. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's like they took the teeth out of this, by not having the whole thing with the clown with the axe. The thing that he dreads the most is some poor deformed kid that's in a room. Like, why is that taking over his whole life?
That's a good question. I mean, why does that happen in the story, in the Books of Blood? I mean, it's something that consumes him because he can't sleep at night. He's just obsessed by it.
Well, and it's not really explained too well in the Books of Blood why he's so afraid of a guy with an axe, and he has this recurring nightmare of a clown with an axe dragging the axe up the stairs.
Yeah, well, there are things called phobias. I mean, I know a girl who's deadly afraid of pigeons, of all things. So she can't even. She sees a pigeon in the square, she goes around the square. So where's the logic in that? And
Yeah.
So that's just the way some people have phobias, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and in the movie adaptations, they always want to tie it to some real life experience. And it seems like in movies more often a dream that someone has based on their fear is always like just reliving something that happened in the past. And I don't know about you, but I don't dream things that happened already.
Yeah, well...
I mean, I don't know that if people really do that. I think that's just a movie trope.
Yeah. A recurring nightmare is definitely a recurring trope. I mean, it's like, why do people trip when they're running away from the killer? Why doesn't the car start when, the killer is right there? It's just the way some people get used to making horror movies, I guess.
People dream flashbacks of real-life events.
It's a cheap way of putting some foreshadowing into a movie.
Yeah.
Or exposition through a nightmare.
Yeah. When they can't be in the character's head and think, listen to them think like you can in a story.
There's also the one of dreaming of things to come. That's also very used in supernatural movies.
Yeah.
It's funny because a little more info about this is that I'm gonna quote David, our friend, again from the timewinds.com/Cloud forum. He at one point apparently traded some messages with McQueenie on a message board. And according to him, McQueenie said that the script was the result of Fox producers wanting a PG-13 movie, but it's hard to tell. Kids running around campus and pulling pranks and having the cops kill Quaid at the end was just lame. We can only hope that this version will have a finale with the axe intact. Why not just keep it exactly the same story, but extend it with more dialogue scenes? So he was also referring to the upcoming Dredd movie. Yeah. But you were talking about removing the teeth of it, and, I think he agrees that, it was just lame. Like, Quaid's death is very anticlimactic. Another thing that... has to do with this whole Dredd Central message boards discussion with Moriarty or Drew McQueenie was at one point he's quoted here in Revelations as saying in 25th of September 2004 he said, "You hate me. I get it. I'm not about to defend my work to you." And by you he means the people at the message board. There is nothing I will ever say or do that will meet with your approval, and I couldn't possibly care less. So far, there's been one person to please Barker. There's been one person to please Barker. Mission accomplished. Next up, we have to please the director, and if we sign any of the guys we're talking about, that'll be a kick. And when the film comes out, I'm confident we'll please the fans at that point. And I think this was around the time when the draft of the script came out in public. So
is that the same draft that you have, you think?
Yeah, I think so. So probably he did not leak this, because if he was trying to get this done, then it might have been someone else in the process that didn't like the script and they decided to leak it. So I'm backtracking my statement, and I'm thinking that probably it was someone else. So, And he said, the thing I've always responded to about the story is that it's not supernatural. It's one of the few short stories from Clive that has none of those overtones. Yeah. It's about the shit that we carry inside ourselves. And if Eduardo, and he was talking about the director that was going to film this, is going to try and latch an Asian horror vibe with creepy dead girls onto it, that's his thing. I believe it's a mistake. We wrote the draft we wanted to. I know it's been 2 years since Eduardo's been trying to get his made. He hasn't found a writer yet, and a big part of that is because the material is so strong that it feels almost sacrilegious to graft something else on top of it. And I guess on top of it, he means like his own draft of the script. Yeah. To grafted a lot of stuff. So this was from Fangoria in October 2000.
And Clive has said that before too, about it being the only story with no real supernatural element. I don't know. I mean, the ending of Dredd, the short story, Quaid seems like is being kept alive longer than he should. I mean, that's debatable, but
I'm sorry, in which version?
In the short story, when he's being chopped up with the axe, and he's like, "Why am I not dying? And this is horrible." It's like the worst thing is pain without
hope of release.
Yeah, it feels like he's being kept alive longer than he should. Like there's some sort of supernatural thing there, but that's debatable.
I think that's just Stephen unconsciously trying to keep him alive. Like he's not hitting anything vital. Right. And it says something like the little clown, referring to Stephen, was having so much fun. He could keep this guy alive if they tried a little bit, Yeah. They could keep him alive for a long time. And then Quaid is like finding out that there were dreams come true. There was hope, pain without hope of healing. And, I'm quoting from my mind because I love that final paragraph so much. But, it does seem like Quaid was in for a very rough ride. He was going to get to know that axe pretty intimately.
Yeah. Well, and there, and just the way things all come together that Steven just happens to sort of assemble this nightmare, recurring nightmare that Quaid has is almost supernatural in a way too. It is and it isn't. I mean, it's a story.
There's also the element where Quaid is looking at it with his own eyes, and he's like projecting his own fears into Steven. Like he's coming mismatched clothes, and he looks like a clown to Quaid because that's what he's afraid of.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's true. I mean, having blood smeared on your face isn't exactly the same thing as being a clown.
Right.
Yeah. And having baggy clothes.
Yeah, but if you're scared of clowns, and if it's dark enough, it looks like clown makeup.
Yeah.
And I'll agree that the axe thing is a really huge coincidence. Like you said, it's all the elements just fall into place at the end of the story, and I think it falls into place beautifully. But it does seem to be like almost supernatural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then so on this one, the movie adaptation that we actually got, they wanted to be clear that the main character, they weren't going to screw him up and make him go nuts and do the ending that we're used to. I mean, the Dread movie, they did kill Steven, in a way that's, I don't know, I mean,
which shouldn't have happened because Steven isn't meant to die.
yeah, right. I mean, Steven sort of becomes the instrument of the dread that Quaid feels, right? He becomes an embodiment of it.
Yes,
that transformation is like the most important focus of the ending of the story.
But de Blasi's movie, I don't think even transmitted accurately the whole thing about Quaid's fear and how much it affected him. I didn't get that vibe at all. I mean,
well, and it had to put it, it had to trace his fear to real life events. Some crazy dude shows up at their house and grabs an axe off the front porch and chops up his family for no reason.
And then he had like an hallucination where like one of the strippers in the club like gets cut from, gets split in half while he's watching, and he's like, you remember that scene from de Blasi's movie?
Yes. Yeah, and and it's like if you were really having that hallucination and you understood that you would know that it's because you had this trauma in your past, and you'd be like, okay, I gotta get out of here. You wouldn't start screaming like he did and freaking out and thinking that it's real.
I think that the Quaid in this draft of the script that we're discussing today, I think even as different as it may be, the fact that he's a professor and not a guy that walks around the campus, I think they actually approached the written character better than de Blasi did with the movie. And in the de Blasi movie, Quaid is just this douchebag. It's just this very physical, very bully type guy, and he's not as manipulative. He's not as subtle as it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes around with a gun shooting, and he goes like, and I didn't really get the Quaid vibe from the movie that actually got made. And in this script, Quaid is very manipulative. In that respect, I think they got the character down pat.
But he doesn't become as much of a friend to Steven in this story. I mean, in this draft. It's like he's, Steven meets him and they have some drinks, and then he really more becomes friends with Cheryl, and Steven's sort of tagging along, trying to stay close to Cheryl.
Yes, I guess that happened because they made like that the teacher-student kind of gap there. So
I
don't know. But yeah, you're right. I mean, in this draft of the script, they don't get along as much as.
They have a friendship. In de Blasi's movie, they have a friendship that is like on and off, or it's on, and then he goes too far, and then it's off, and then it's like, oh well, maybe, but then he does some horrible things. And in the Dread short story, they are friends up to a point when Steven doesn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. But he gets
and don't forget
into it.
And don't forget, Cheryl didn't have anything to do with Steven in the story at all. I mean, she was just...
I think he just liked her, right? I mean, that was it.
I don't even get that vibe. I think he might have thought she was attractive, but it's like, well, then...
But he never had any relationship with her.
No. In this one, they open up with, Cheryl and Steven being boyfriend and girlfriend, and, I guess it was trying to make a little more tension or something.
Well, and it's more... it's just more stuff because you can't... The short story of Dredd is probably not big enough to make a full movie. Yeah. So they just had to put in more character development and backstory. Okay. As
a closing statement, I think that I actually had more fun reading the script this time around than I did the first time in 2004 or 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
Because now I have, I've seen the movie that came out.
Yeah.
And I hated it. So now in retrospect, looking at the script, like I said, it would still have been very different from the story.
And it doesn't have the Touch the Beast.
Yeah, it doesn't have Touch the Beast 800 times. Or the Dreadheads video program where they interview everybody and it's like, get a t-shirt saying Dreadheads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's like, it's more... I like the haunted house thing, although it would be a little more... It seemed like something out of Fight Club. Like the guy moves into an old creepy house and, there's something going on at the house or something. But I kind of enjoy the script a little more. It's still not a movie of Dredd I would like to see at all. So I'll give it. I'll say that much. I still wouldn't have wanted this movie to be the definitive adaptation of Dredd.
No. Well, and you can only do it once, right? I mean, if you do the movie, unless it's really, really good, and then maybe 20 years later someone will do a remake. But
shucks, I mean, the Hulk came out. Ang Lee's Hulk came out in...
Yeah, that's true. That's a good
When did it come out?
2001 or something like that.
Or something. 2003, and then back in 2006 or something, they made a new Hulk movie. So,
but that's because it's like, oh, well, that doesn't quite tie close enough, and we want to tie in the Avengers, all these characters to the Avengers, and Ang Lee's movie was too, I guess it was too artistic, or they felt like it was too its own thing, and I don't know. I liked that. I liked the first Hulk movie.
Me too. Anyway, just to wrap up my opinion about Dredd, I will always think of a perfect adaptation of Dredd was the one in the Eclipse graphic novel by Dan Brereton.
Yeah.
That, for me, is the perfect adaptation of Dredd. Quaid looks just like I imagined him when I read the story, and, it's a wonderful adaptation. So if anybody out there can get their hands on the Eclipse graphic novel called Dredd, adapted by Dan Brereton, the same artist that did the Nocturnals, get that and read it because it's beautiful. So...
Okay, so next we have Clive Barker's The Mummy. So those of you out there that some of you may not realize that The Mummy, the Brendan Fraser movie, actually went through a whole bunch of different proposed scripts and directors and a lot of famous people that horror fans will recognize. So it was, I think, first with George A. Romero, then a combination of Clive Barker and Mick Garris, then Alan Ormsby, John Sayles, Joe Dante, Kevin Jarre, and Abby Bernstein. So a huge long, and those are all the ones that didn't happen, right? I mean, the new one is somebody else entirely that's not on that list.
Yes, it was the one directed by Jonathan Summers.
Yeah.
I think so. The one with Brendan Fraser.
Yeah.
This was... we're basing most of our knowledge of this script that was never made from an article in Fangoria magazine, which was, I think it was called The Mummy Wars or something like that. And in that article, it explained a lot of stuff that... The Curse of the Lost Mummies, that's the title of the article.
Yeah.
By Warren. And in this article, it explains exactly what happened and basically Universal went through this period where they were like thinking about bringing back some of the old Universal monsters, and they decided around the late 80s that they would try to bring back the Mummy. So they started approaching several famous directors and writers, see if they could find anyone who was willing to give new life to the Mummy. So one of the people that was approached was Clive Barker and Mick Garris, and
yeah, and they thought that it would sound neat to call it Clive Barker's The Mummy.
Oh yeah. I mean, wasn't there also at some point, and I'm just bringing this up by memory, wasn't there at some point also an idea for Clive Barker to make his own version of the Frankenstein monster? Because I think I remember something about that. And
well, that's interesting. I mean, I know he's talked about Frankenstein a lot.
Yeah, and even had like this drawing that was like a stitched skin hanging from a line or something that was called like Frankenstein. Well, he did Frankenstein in Love. Yeah. So, yeah, but going back to the Mummy, Revelations also has a lot of clippings about this, and they actually flesh out the story of this missing version a little bit longer.
Oh, good, yeah, because there's a really short description in the Fangoria article.
Yeah, in Revelations description it says, "The Mummy, also known as the Egyptian Project, this is the story of the ancient Egypt cult of Sithis, discovered by an explorer which, through its influence over his baby son, attempts to impose its power on the Western world. This was to be no unstoppable mummy chases hero through the desert movie, more of a warning to those who have taken to sitting inside pyramids. Pyramidic symbols abound, with a building reminiscent of that, decorated with a lament configuration in Hellraiser 4, where a tentacled monster with some slinky movements is thrown into the Barker melting pot with a bisexual baddie. Lately resurrected as a straight remake without Barker involvement, and after drafts by a cast of thousands, including Mick Garris and George Romero, but with Gods and Monsters' Brendan Fraser, Universal have their 1932 version of The Mummy finally updated as a non-horror film, and as the studio's third biggest U.S. opening ever. And then they have a little treatment about Clive Barker's The Mummy from 1990. It says here, it's a quote from the treatment. Apparently the hero would be called Rick, and it says, Rick tries to get up when Catherine appears bare-breasted, but he's literally mummified from the neck down. Catherine puts her lips against Marietta's breastbone. Marietta shudders and sweats. I am the first Earth child of Sithis, she says. The thread-thin tentacles appear from around her lower belly and caress Catherine's face as she falls to her knees in front of Marietta. Rick starts to yell in horror, and we stay on his face as the shadows of Catherine and Marietta's mating play over his features. We will spread now like a new nation, Marietta says. The end of the human species has begun. Pape steps into view and starts to bandage up Rick's face, stuffing his mouth with dirt first. Our hero has become the Mummy. So that's the part of the treatment.
Wow.
Barker's The Mummy. And yes, and apparently this was written in 1990 with Mick Garris.
Yeah, so Clive Barker wrote a treatment and asked Mick Garris to write the screenplay. And he was really pleased with the screenplay, and there was a quote that apparently I found the right writer, and then Clive would have been director.
Yeah, the studio thought at the time, of course, the studio being Universal, they thought that Clive Barker's The Mummy would be a great title. Garris said to Fangoria magazine. So I was brought in. Clive and I sat together and talked it out, and then I went and wrote the screenplay for him to direct. It was really a fun, twisted script with lots of sexuality and ambisexuality. Lots of fun, strange things. Very unusual for a studio film. I thought that when I read Clive's story before I even wrote the script, I turned it in, got paid, and never heard another word. So one of the funny things about Clive Barker's The Mummy was that actually, according to the article on Fangoria, it didn't contain a walking mummy at all.
Right, he was in a museum in Beverly Hills through the whole thing, and someone wakes up these alien protectors, and they're the threat, right? And they're like these spidery creatures.
Yeah, the mummy, what would be under the wrappings would be a rather arachnid-like intelligent creature. So, who knows what it might have been. There are some, I think there are some concept images of what the Clive Barker mummy would have been like, which is still pretty humanoid to me, and it's got these straps, these leather straps covering its body and over its eyes, and kind of reminds me of the Nyx mask in Lord of Illusions.
Yeah.
So we might add some of those images to the show notes afterwards. The mummy designs were done by Johnson and by Steve Johnson and XFX. So we'll be sure to cut and paste some of these designs and put them in the show notes.
Yeah, it must have been a disappointment. I mean, they went so far, they got so far into planning this thing, and then it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of information on Revelations, too, about this. And, for example, for Fear magazine, there's a little more information at the time. In October 1990, Mark Salisbury said, it will not resemble at all any mummy movie you've ever seen. And it'll be a deeply perverse and dark movie. I thought I'd given up my extreme pathological and psychotic movie making after Hellraiser. I'm sorry, this was a quote from
Clive.
Yeah, I think so. If somebody thought I'd given up my extreme pathological and psychotic movie making after Hellraiser, they had better think again. I'm going to the limits of the MPAA. So that's one of the quotes that. And then it says also it was not meant to be a remake of The Mummy. It was a movie that only vaguely resembled The Mummy in the sense that it had some Egyptian imagery. And at the time, they were still calling it the Egyptian Project. So basically, it would be interesting. I mean, it would involve like aliens and maybe. So it wasn't so much a supernatural thing or just an Egyptian magic or gods thing. It would be actually aliens. From what I understand.
And that's really interesting. And also, every other one of those writers was working on some variation of a remake of the original Mummy movie, right? So this is the only one. So that seems probably a little controversial and maybe a part of the reason it didn't get made. This is the only one that was an original idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, and I was just reading another Fangoria quote where it said, "The Mummy will be undiluted horror," and the hype was really good. I mean, I wonder if we could ever get a copy of this draft because it sounds pretty interesting. It says here that Nightbreed was a deliberate intermingling of fantasy and horror. The Mummy will be undiluted horror. This was a quote from Philip Nutman from Fangoria. And another thing. Yeah, at the time, Mick Garris was making Sleepwalkers, which was that movie where Clive also had a cameo appearance. You remember that?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Exactly. It would be a reinvention of The Mummy, basically. So, and then, of course, they decided to go a more traditional way, one that didn't involve so much horror. Actually, if you look at the Mummy franchise that we got with Brendan Fraser, it's pretty family friendly, even for kids and everything. With the Scorpion King and all those movies that came, I'm guessing Clive's version would have been like a one shot and would have been really impressive. Yeah,
and it's kind of a neat idea to have Mick Garris writing and Clive directing because. You look at like Sleepwalkers. That movie had a cool idea, but the execution of it was a little corny.
Yeah. I love what you did there with the corny thing because there's a police officer gets killed with an
ear of corn.
Yeah, it gets stabbed in the back with an ear of corn. So.
Yeah.
Another quote.
Yeah, and she says like something like, "Make sure you get your vegetables," or it's been so long since I saw that.
Yeah, there's another another one from that movie was a cop kebab, when the guy sticks a pencil on a cop's ear or something.
Oh, yeah.
But there's another quote from Mick Garris from Imagi Movies number 2, winter of 93-94, and it was Clive Barker saying, Mick Garris and I did a script, but it was a little too weird for Universal. One of the problems is that, unlike vampires or the Frankenstein monster, the mummy is one of the least likely characters to scare you, which, he has a point.
Yeah.
So our version only used the mummy as a starting place for something else, which was very grim. Yeah.
That's a good point, yeah. I mean, that's true. The mummy's not really that scary.
Oh, there's more. Mick Garris exposes a lot more of the story in the World Horror Convention book of April 2005. And if I quote this, it's like, looking back, our version of the mummy was precisely what the powers that were at Universal did not want. It made the mummy story over for the late 20th century. Not in terms of its effects, this was before CGI brought its dubious gifts to the process of horror filmmaking, but in terms of content. We had one particular narrative hook that we were very proud of. In the first scene, a strange boy child is born under circumstances, high howling winds and a ferocious thunderstorm that suggests something unnatural is afoot. The narrative then jumps 20 years or so, and we pick up the story of how sacred Egyptian artifacts are being brought to America for an exhibition that would put the Tutankhamun exhibit to shame. An uncommonly beautiful woman is threaded into the action, a seducer and a murderer of mysterious origin. Of the boy child, now presumably grown to adulthood, we get no sight. Meanwhile, our anti-heroine is seducing her way through the male members of the cast, only to be revealed in the third act as the boy child, now turned, thanks to surgery and hormones, into a woman. What? Whoa. We love the idea so much that we put the mystery surrounding this ambiguous creature and her extraordinary secret at the heart of our story. Our creation was not welcomed at Universal, needless to say. Yeah, no surprise there.
Oh, my God.
The script, which Mick had labored hard over, working in a diminutive hotel room in London, which I visited daily for story conferences, was eviscerated by the script readers and our producers. How could we expect to get away with something so weird? Nobody in America, we were told, would accept such a ridiculous premise. A few years later, Miramax made a huge hit out of a little movie called The Crying Game, which, if you remember, had a girl who was a few inches more than a girl and got naked to prove it. I sent the receipts of The Crying Game over to the folks who rejected our perverted, their word, version of the mummy every week. I doubt they saw the irony. But there was great fun we had back then, simply tossing these ideas back and forth with Mick. His cinematic knowledge and recall is truly impressive, so he was always able to warn me when we were treading on cliché so we could avoid it. Of course, it was cliché they had wanted all along, and if we only had the good sense to deliver it, we probably would have got the picture made. So this is in April 2005, and actually, I was pretty surprised to read this myself. And,
holy cow. And that's interesting, too. I mean, it seems like maybe they're trying to use homophobia as a kind of horror.
Could be. I mean, definitely, now I understand more about the part where they said that it would be a very ambisexual and, movie.
Yeah, right. That wasn't explained in the Fangoria article.
Would have been curious to see.
Yeah.
Rachel Weisz play a transgendered supernatural creature from the Mummy universe. I don't know what was supposed to happen to this person. If she was supposed to be human or not, because at one point they do mention that there were aliens involved and a whole new religion. So I wonder.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the way the Hollywood system works is that, there's such a big disconnect between the viewing audience and the studio people, right? I mean, we want to see things that are different, things that we've never seen before. Those are what get talked about, and those are the ones that they're the most terrified of making.
Yeah. And if I can do a little shout out to a friend of mine called Nathan that loves this idea that I'm going to mention next. This Egyptian project I think at one point, and I don't know if this preceded the Universal request or if it came afterwards, but by the time of Hellraiser 3, so I'm guessing it probably was around the same time, they were playing with these ideas to make a Hellraiser 3 version that would involve ancient Egypt. And there is an essay written by Peter Atkins called Building the Beast in Stages, The Long Making of Hell on Earth, where he goes over, which will be an interesting article that we will discuss in a further episode of Scripts That Never Were, because we're going to discuss Hellraiser 3, the unfilmed version that had a very different pinhead and all that stuff. So in that article, he does mention that there was an idea at one point to make a Hellraiser movie set partly in ancient Egypt, and the first Cenobite was a pharaoh. And and what he said in the essay was, how about the fun we could have had when his mummified remains are dug up in the 1990s and brought to an American museum, and some clown, in the process of making a diorama display of the discovered treasures, realigns the objects found in the tomb into a certain pyramidic pattern, a pattern that predated the lament configuration as a means of access from this reality to that other we all know and love. That was Clive's first take on an idea for the sequel, for Hellraiser 3. And Pete Atkins goes on to say, I liked it. Chris Figg liked it. Chris Figg was the executive from New World Productions. But despite it being his idea, Clive decided that he didn't like it. Or rather, he didn't like it as the basis for a Hellraiser movie. And then he says, my guess was he saw the potential for a whole new Barkarian mythology in there and wanted to keep it clean. There was much talk in the genre press about a couple of years later about something called Egyptian Project, a working title for a movie Clive was developing with Mick Garris for Universal Pictures. I had never read Mick's screenplay, so I don't know if it has anything in common with those earlier ideas of Clive's, but I'm sure you Barker completists out there will be happy to learn about the particular strand of potential cross-fertilization between his works, which, is always a recurring...
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I can see that, because I was just thinking that as you were reading that, I was just thinking that kind of that same thing. It's like, that's really cool, but it's pretty bold to kind of decide the origin of the Cenobites. I mean, once you put something like that out there in movies, it's done and you can never take it back.
Yeah, that's true. And, if Universal was shopping around for someone to do a mummy movie since the 80s, if this story about Hellraiser 3 was in the 90s, maybe there was already some kind of hubbub that had made its way to Clive. Maybe that's why he decided to, Hellraiser in Egypt would be nice, but let's keep this for a possible, mummy movie. Maybe that's what he thought. And, So, mummy.
So it would be a Hellraiser, like more of a Hellraiser kind of a feel.
Yeah.
Or atmosphere.
Another quote from Mick Garris to Fangoria number 112, May 92. He mentioned that The Mummy would be a very fun and very erotic draft script, and I quote, it has every kind of sexual coupling you can imagine, and a few you can't, I hope. So, it does seem like it was a pretty bold script, involving a transgendered female character. Mummy that would not be a mummy, would be an arachnid-like creature, aliens, and, fantastic sexual couplings. So I don't know. Maybe it was a little too bold for what they were looking for. Like Clive said, they were looking for cliche. They were looking for the bandaged guy going grrr.
Yeah.
So, here's another one. Mick Garris also said to Fangoria, and this was in 1999, that the mummy itself is a suspended animation creature from long ago and far away, with alien protectors that come to life. It is housed in a brand new museum built in the heart of Beverly Hills.
Right.
The grand opening night ceremony is greeted with a meltdown, eruption, and release of these creatures from beyond our planet. There was a mummy that was actually wrapped about what was underneath, a rather arachnid-like intelligent creature. I thought at the time that I could not imagine a major studio doing this kind of movie, and I was right. So, yeah. It says here, it was almost like chariots of the mummies. In other words, the ancient Egyptians were inspired by and involved with alien intelligences from thousands of years before. So that basically this was also like Stargate before Stargate, you know.
Yeah.
And it says here that, here's an actual nice little paragraph that, you know, pretty much sums up all the things they did. So it says here, for Cine Fantastique, Mick Garris told them the whole story about what happened. And it was like, Universal was very high on making Clive Barker's The Mummy, so Clive came with a brief outline which he was going to direct. I wrote a very bizarre and twisted script based on Clive's very bizarre and twisted treatment. We were both really excited about it. So, like I said, it would take place in Beverly Hills, in the museum with a large Egyptology department. They would rebuild an entire tomb inside the museum. And then it was like, like the ancient Egyptians were inspired and involved with alien intelligences. And he says, I did 2 or 3 drafts that I was really excited about, and the studio had virtually green-lit. What Clive and I had done was something entirely out of the imagination. This next version really combined the Karloff and the Lon Chaney Jr. movies in that we had both Imhotep and Karis. It was a romance. I would love to have made it a period movie in that Art Deco explosion of the 20s and 30s, which was inspired by the King Tut discoveries, but the budget would not allow that.
Yeah, so later on, Mick Garris took a shot at it by himself without Clive, right? And that's what he was talking about there?
Yeah, the one that had Imhotep and Karis, yes.
Yeah, and it seems like the script kept getting rewritten kind of based on that, right?
Yes, I think
later on
they would start over again, and sometimes they would transport some of the elements from another script into the story. Yeah.
Because it seems like Joe Dante's script is really close to what ended up being filmed. You know, just reading the rest of this article. I mean, we don't have to go into the details of every single version of the script, because it starts getting more and more like the movie that we've actually seen. You know, I think people took, you know, all these people that rewrote it took, you know, more and more stuff from...
Yeah. Well, Mick Garris came back to the project after the project left Romero's hands, which would have been interesting.
Yeah.
George Romero do a mummy movie. And I hear that...
but he, I mean, even more than Clive, he just can't stand the Hollywood system.
Yeah. And then Mick Garris says that when he got the project back, and this was by himself, I think, he says they put a very strict budget on this movie. At the time, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s, they thought they would make a mummy movie with $15 million, and then, of course, they started raising it up a little more. But still, here it says they put a very strict budget on it, and Mick Garris wrote the script to be made from that. Again, it was contemporary. It was a good, workable script, and that's when Garris returned Karis to the story and Imhotep. And Mick Garris said, mainly what I did was to change the characterization somewhat from what George had done, George Romero, and deepen the romantic elements. It opened with a little girl lost in the desert where her father is doing a dig. He's an archaeologist working in Egypt, and her being lost leads to them finding a tomb. Now it's 30 years later, and she's an archaeologist discovering the tomb of Imhotep. They excavate it, and sort of like in the Barker version, bring it to a museum in the States. Karis appears too, as does the reincarnation angle. Imhotep falls in love with our heroine and tries to bring back Anuk-Sunamun, which this is, like you said, similar to what we got in the actual Mummy movie.
Yeah, and what's really funny is actually I was a teacher in an Eskimo, a Yupik Eskimo village when this movie came out, and Anuk means shit in Yupik.
Okay.
So everybody would, you know, the kids would all say like Anuk, and you know, then they think they're going to get in trouble, so they're like Sunamun.
Oh, okay. Oh boy, that's funny. So yeah, that's what we got. I think I haven't seen the Mummy movie in a while, even though sometimes it pops on TV and I will see it.
Yeah.
But I think I recall something, and I don't know where I heard this, but apparently there was supposed to be a little detail from Clive Barker's version that made it into the final movie, which was that there would be a lock on the Book of the Dead or something. There would be a puzzle lock, and that kind of would connect with what Clive had put in his script too, back in the time when it was supposed to be like I don't know if this is true. Now that I'm saying it, I'm seeing that it might not be true, but it was like the lament configuration angle on the Hellraiser 3 script would have been that there would be kind of a lament configuration thing on a Book of the Dead. And then in the Brendan Fraser movie, there is the Book of the Dead, and there's a little lock on the cover too that's like a little puzzle. Yeah.
So, and I rented the movie, but I didn't get around to seeing it before this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I've been budgeting my time, and I kind of figured it wouldn't really help us that much anyway.
Yeah. But then, of course, they wanted to spend $15 million on a Mummy movie, and the Universal decided to spend $80 million afterwards.
Yeah. I know, that's crazy.
Make a PG-13 movie, which is probably a wise financial decision.
Yeah, I mean, it did really well. They made 2 sequels and then a whole series of Scorpion King movies after that.
And they're pretty fun. I mean, the Mummy 1 and 2 and 3 are pretty fun. I had fun watching them. They're not masterpieces in any sense of the word. They do their job really good of entertaining.
Well, I saw all 3 of those. I haven't seen any Scorpion King movies, but I saw all 3 of those, and I can really only remember the first one. I don't remember anything that happened in the number 2 or number 3.
Yeah, they kind of blend in together to me too. Yeah. Here it is, another interview with Mick Garris that has a quote that said, "I had 2 different lives on the Mummy that didn't happen. Clive had written a story, An Approach of the Mummy, and it took place in Beverly Hills. And then I wrote the screenplay, and he was originally set to direct it." This is nice. I didn't know that. Apparently, that second try that Mick Garris did, maybe Clive was meant to direct it.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it says right here. There were 2 different lives on the Mummy that didn't happen. Clive had written the story, Approach of the Mummy. It took place in Beverly Hills, and then I wrote the screenplay, and he was originally set to direct it. Then they decided not to do it, and then they thought of me directing it, and then they decided not to do it.
Oh, okay.
Later, I came back and wrote an entirely different version of the Mummy based on one that George Romero was going to do at Universal. Yes. We were prepping and ready to go, and then the head of Universal was deposed and given a production position there, and he decided he wanted to do the Mummy. And then he turned it into an $80 million movie, and I was out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there you go. He says that the Clive movie was also in the $15 million budget area. This was an interview for Film Force IGN in 2003. And that's pretty much all the information that we could scrounge up about the Mummy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we ever get a chance to read the script, we can come back to this again.
Oh yeah, I would love to be able to read it and discuss it.
This would have been something really interesting.
Yeah.
So, in over the next episode or 2, we'll be talking about the prequel to Lord of Illusions. We'll be talking about American Horror, and we'll be talking about Tortured Souls, and the Hellraiser 3. The Hellraiser 3 that we didn't see.
Yeah, it's all in Revelations. There's Primal. Primal is a comic book. Oh, yeah, Primal was also meant to be a movie, right?
Oh, wow. Well, that would have been something, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I was looking at projects here, and yes, Primal was a graphic novel. And at the
really, really interesting, freaky graphic novel.
Yeah, and at the 92 Cannes Film Festival, Miramax announced that Primal would be the first picture for their new Dimension division with a budget of $7 million. Clive was set to executive produce, and Miramax were in the process of negotiating to have him direct as well before the project failed.
Was that Steve Niles and Clive Barker? I can't remember.
I don't know. It was Dan Chichester and Eric Saltzgaber that started.
Oh, okay. Okay. And Clive came up with the basic story for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool things here that we can research on and try to do at least another couple of episodes about this. And, for example, End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Clive Barker was also tapped for this movie. It says here.
Wow. If Clive Barker was involved, I bet Arnold Schwarzenegger wouldn't be shooting the devil with a rocket launcher.
Yeah. It says here, can I just mention this? There's just one little thing on Revelations, and it's Clive Barker quote saying, well, End of Days is a very quick story. It was just that my then agent called me up and said, we have this movie. They really need to do it really quickly. It was one of those situations where there was something quite tempting about it. I like making movies, and I was sort of looking at the idea of making a movie in a very short time frame, and there would have been something quite entertaining about doing a Schwarzenegger picture. Yeah. But in the end, you sort of have to make your choices. You get one life, and you have to choose really between the things you're going to put your time into and the things you're not. I don't regret that choice, particularly having seen the movie. Clive Barker to IGN.
Well, it would have been a different movie, though.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know. I think that he was just tapped to direct it. I think it would have still be with Arnold Schwarzenegger and probably the same script. Also, Alien 3. Clive passed on that one too.
Really?
Yeah. Paul
Alien
Mather
went through so many iterations.
Yeah, to Paul Mather on Blitz number 49, January 87. Says here, there was talk of me directing Aliens 3, but I didn't want to do it. There are excellent films, but what I do to come from me. So yeah. He also turned down the job of writing the screenplay for Aliens 3. I think that I should be pursuing my own stuff. What I do best is imagine. I don't like the idea of picking up on somebody else's narrative, which is something that Clive has mentioned several times over the years, right? He doesn't do derivative material.
Yeah, he's got too much stuff floating around in his head to do that.
Oh, this is funny. I turned down the request to write and direct Aliens 3. My agent in California went mad. You've never seen an agent in such a state of mortal panic as when I said no. It would have brought me millions, presumably. Incidentally, he's not my agent anymore. Yeah, well, he said that aliens didn't seem terribly interesting to him. They thought they were inarticulate and essentially machines, albeit organic ones. And that is so very far from what I do. I just couldn't find my way around this warrior tribe of mute, insect-like devourers, murderers. It did capture my imagination, but far too short of a time. And also Creature from the Black Lagoon, Cinderella. What?
Cinderella?
Oh, yeah. It says here from Lost Souls magazine, that was a fan club, issue 6, January 97. It says, Cinderella, ever watchful for a way to make a buck, Hollywood continued to attempt to recycle the good old stories that have survived the test of time. No doubt this one would have turned out owing more to the elemental horrors of the Grimm tradition than to the sugar-sweet fairy tales of today. And then it says here that Clive was quoted as saying, the main reason I'm taking a break from movies is because of the people we have to work with. They are by and large not nice, generous, creative people. I needed to be away from that for a while just to get back in touch with what I really like to do, which is to paint and write. I'll enter that arena again somewhere down the line. I just signed a 4-book contract with HarperCollins that takes me through until 2002. So there's plenty of work for me to do.
That's Aberrat, I'm assuming.
I don't know. Maybe. The last couple of months I've been offered plenty of horror movies, and today I was offered Cinderella to write and direct. I told him if my agent played the ugly sister. He said he looks wonderful in a dress, but let's not go there. So,
there's not a whole lot of, I mean, even in the Grimm fairy tale, there's not a whole lot of horror in Cinderella. I mean, the only thing, right, is I think birds peck out the eyes of the sisters, and she cuts her heel and her toes. The sisters cut off their heel and their toes to try to fit their feet into the glass slipper.
Oh yeah, that's pretty grim. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, other than that, it's not really like scary. It's just like little like ugh.
Yeah, it's those old Teutonic Germanic tales that, they had all that stuff to scare children with. So, I mean, I guess we can add to the title of today's episode that we also covered Cinderella. and
yep, and Primal and rocket launchering the devil movie was the End of Days.
End of Days and Alien 3.
And Alien 3.
Well, of course, these were not even scripts. These were just like opportunities that Clive had to get on a project, and he never really accepted. So
yeah, they're little footnotes. They're interesting though.
Yeah, they are. They sure are. So yeah, and like I said, I would really love to be able to read some of these scripts, and I mean, especially the one that we're going to cover in another episode, The Great Unknown, Harry the Moor's First Adventure, because I know there are a lot of people out there that really dig Harry the Moor, and
Yeah.
Okay, so you can reach us on the web at www.clivebarkercast.com. We're on iTunes, so leave us a review there. We just recently had to redo the whole iTunes section, so it's fresh. So if you want, we could use some new reviews. We have a Facebook page, and you can also join the Occupy Midian group on Twitter. We're at BarkerCast and at Occupy Midian. The forum where we can be found, discussing this stuff is www.timewinds.com/Clive. There you sign up for the forum. And the official website for Occupy Midian is www.occupymidian.com. Crystal Rain, who normally does our Occupy Midian report, you can find her on www.bringbacknightbreed.blogspot.com. Hello, this is Ryan again. In the original airing of this episode, we had the song I'm a Mummy by Bob McFadden. In order to respect, it's from 1959, so I don't even know if there are still, rights issues with it. But in order to respect the rights holders, we have removed it from the episode. I recommend you find I'm a Mummy by Bob McFadden and give it a listen. Thanks for understanding, and this podcast having no beginning will have no end.